Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wāhine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Wāhine. Today you've got me, Harita, and I'm joined with Hayley. Today we've got two awesome Labour MPs. The first one is Rachel Brooking. She is a mother of three, a keen runner, and a Dunedinite. She has degrees in science and law from Otago University, 2 decades practising law, including time working for the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and experience as a company director, which means that she was well prepared to become an MP in 2020. As a backbencher MP, she was a member of the Finance and Expenditure, Environment and Regulations Review Select Committees. In April, she was made a minister, holding the portfolios of Oceans and Fisheries, Food Safety, Associate Environment, and Associate Immigration. Rachel is married to cancer specialist and campaigner Dr. Chris Jackson, and they have 3 school-aged children. Welcome, Rachel.
Dan Rosewarne is a List MP based in North Canterbury. In 1999, at the age of 18, Dan joined the New Zealand Army and trained as an automotive mechanic. He would later serve as a workshop manager before commissioning as an officer in the Royal New Zealand Army Logistic Regiment in 2017. In 2005, Rosewarne made the first of 2 deployments to Afghanistan as part of New Zealand's contribution to the war in Afghanistan, and making his second in 2012. In between his deployments, he served overseas in 2008 in the Solomon Islands as part of the Regional Assistance Mission. As a Staff Sergeant in 2016, he contributed to the New Zealand Army response to the Kaikoura earthquake, which was absolutely wild. I would love to hear more about that. But you did drive one of 27 trucks carrying over 44 tons of vital supplies into the region. You then retired from the Army in July 2022 at the rank of captain, just days before swearing into Parliament. That must have been a wild few days. After you were sworn into Parliament, you were a member of the Foreign Defence and Trade Select Committee since February, among other roles. You have a wife and 2 children, and you live in, what's this, Waimakariri? Yes, I did get that right. Yeah. How are you doing today? It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great to be here.
To start us off, how has the campaign been ramping up so far? I'll start with you, Dan.
Yeah, it's been good. It's, as an MP, you just try and get out in front of as many people as you can, tell them what you've done, what you're going to do if you're re-elected, and then what's at risk if you lose the election. For myself, I've just been trying to get out, talk to the community, do door knocking, public meetings, street corner meetings, and then hitting the phones as well. So that's been pretty much me since the House rose last week.
What about you, Rachel?
Yeah, mine's a wee bit different. So because I'm a minister, I'm a spokesperson for the things that I'm a minister of. So that still involves a bit of a travelling around the country, talking sort of in the more specific debates, topic-specific debates rather than area-specific. And like Dan, I'm a List MP and I'm standing in the Dunedin electorate this time as well. And so I'm spending also more time in Dunedin trying to get out and about to as many things as possible. And that's been great. We've got the Polyfest on in Dunedin at the moment. And we've had, today I've had the Polytech's Māori graduation, talked to tertiary union members about some issues on that front, and spoken with the British Council about climate change. So, a good full day. Also been talking about predator control as well. So all sorts of things.
All in
that's
a day's
fascinating.
job. So elections are undeniably a challenging and very exciting time for politicians. How's the family and community support for both of you during this busy time? Rachel, I'll go with you first.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit confusing for my family because obviously both Dan and I are South Island based MPs, so we have to travel a bit more than our friends in Wellington and Auckland in particular, because there's just so many more flights that go between Auckland and Wellington. So my family's actually seen a whole lot more of me than they normally do. But I have a very, very interested kids. Two of my kids are teenagers, and they're very interested in what's going on. So they're asking questions, and my husband's interested as well. And actually, so is the 12-year-old. So we have lots of chats about what's going on, and my husband, basically continues what he's always been doing, which is pretty much solo parenting and organising everything that goes on in the house. And I just sort of back in and out. It's not much fun for him.
Do they ever come up with interesting questions that you may not have thought of previously, and is something that you can actually use when debating in the future?
Well, they come up with so many things. Husband and children all love debating and do it at school and hated it at school. So they're always coming up with lines that I should use that I then often forget to use, or it's after the fact. And I'll say, "Oh, we're having this conversation." They're like, "Oh, you should have said this knockout line," which of course I didn't say. But here we go.
When you come up to a point where either the public have eyes on what you're saying or it's something as important as what you're doing, does it ever keep either of you up awake at night if you might not quite be in the right headspace to reply how you could have previously, or you get information just afterwards and you're thinking, I could have changed that whole conversation? Does that weigh on you, or do you just have to think, it's been done, move on, and it's not really a big deal?
Yeah, I think it's natural to question a lot of those things, and I think if you are a politician that does do that self-reflection, I think you're probably the right person for the job. If you didn't self-evaluate and critique yourself, the other side of it is you're probably a bit too confident, and that's when you could probably get undone. So I think it's a healthy thing, but I mean I do tend to maybe be a bit overly critical of myself, and I do get anxious just like anybody else before a big debate or something big happening in the House. But I think what's important is to have a tight network of support. And the Labour caucus, our class of 2020, I came in a little bit later, but we were quite a tight group. We've got a signal chat group. We talk about things. We flesh things out with each other. So that's definitely very helpful when you're going through challenging times.
Yeah, of course, I agree with Dan that there's always going to be times where you go, damn it, why didn't I say XYZ? That would have been a knockout argument, or and you don't. But also, I'm not one to dwell on the bad for too long, because there's a million other things coming at you immediately afterwards. So you do have to, or you can be disappointed in yourself and reflect and think about what you might do differently next time. You've also got to go and do a million other things.
And you probably can't think on things for too long in this type of job, because otherwise you wouldn't last, right? Because you've got the media attacking you. You've got memes on Facebook about every politician. So no matter what you say, someone is going to poke holes at it, and if you keep thinking about it, you're not going to get anywhere. Dan, the question before about your family and community support. So how's your family and community supporting you in the lead up to the elections, which is only a month away now?
Yeah, so I've got two young kids. So my daughter, she's 10, and my son, he's 12. And my wife is, a big source of support for me. But interestingly, my whole career, I think when I even first met her, I went away for 4 months straight after. And I've been away pretty much, with the military at least 3 months of the year, most of the time. And then coming into Parliament, you spend a lot of time away as well. So you come to election, the House rises, you're sitting on the couch, and my wife will say to me, are you going to go away again? It's kind of our relationship is it's built around kind of me coming and going. So when I am around, it's quite interesting. She wants me to go out the door again, go do something. But no, it's I couldn't do it without them, and you can't do this job as a politician without that family support and support from your local community. So very thankful for that.
Oh, that's very sweet. I will lead into some other topics just a little bit. I really enjoyed getting some questions together for this, so there are a lot of them. Not sorry. Anyhow, Rachel, the government moved to protect the Hauraki Gulf for future generations on the 30th of August this year, with the Marine Protection Bill passing its first reading. The Hauraki Gulf Fisheries Plan is the first fisheries plan for a specific geographic area, and it could nearly triple marine protection in the Gulf, with 19 new marine protection areas to help safeguard and restore its marine ecosystems. Bottom trawling and dangerous seining could be banned from up to 89% of the marine park. Can you tell us a bit more about this? What issues is the Gulf facing now? And what positive change could this mean for biodiversity and protecting the ecosystem of the Gulf? And lastly, are there any issues that the passing of this bill could face within Parliament or via members of the public?
Sure. So the Hauraki Gulf obviously is really important to so many people in the country, and particularly Auckland. And there is a Hauraki Gulf Forum that does a report every 3 years into this. It's called the State of the Gulf. And the state of the Gulf is not great, and it's for all sorts of reasons, including sediment runoff from urban developments and also rural activities as well. Storms that are happening, some fishing as well. So range of factors, and like just general biodiversity loss. There's some islands there that would have had trees on them at some point, and now they don't have trees, so things just run off into the sea. And there's plastic pollution. There's a lot of microplastic pollution in there as well, and they've had stormwater overflows going into the harbour for a long time as well. Auckland Council, and I'm sure there's some government money in it too, that have got a central interceptor now that's been built in Auckland. It's a humongous big infrastructure project, so that'll do much better when there's a storm event, and when at the moment some of the wastewater mixes with the stormwater, and then that overflows into the Gulf. So what we're doing though is that there's really three different things. So one of them is the bill that you've just spoken about, and that is to increase the protected areas in the Gulf. So there's already established a big marine park that goes beyond Great Barrier Island and down into the Coromandel and sort of up into Northland. So it's a really big area, the marine park. And there are already some marine reserves within that park, but they're very small. So what will happen is that there'll be an addition under the bill to a couple of the marine reserves, but also new high protection areas and seafloor protection areas. And so that's all done under the bill, and that's been led by the Minister of Conservation, and will increase the areas where you can't do commercial fishing, and you can't do certain types of fishing, but you'll still be able to do customary fishing in the high protection areas. Then there's the fisheries plan, which we were talking about, and that's a piece of work that I've been involved in with my fisheries hat on. And as you said, it's an area-based, and it's also an ecosystems-based plan, and it's got lots of more work to do in terms of monitoring the area and testing different management methods. So that plan is a great start, and it has to have an annual plan though that specifies all the actions every year. Part of that plan comes from a whole series of work that started with the Sea Change project, and then the Revitalising the Gulf, which was the government response to sea change. So it says that rather than at the moment bottom trawling and is banned in 27% of the Gulf, so you can bottom trawl in most of the Gulf, that will flip that and say, well, you can only bottom trawl in this much smaller area, so we'll ban it in up to 89%. So that little banning, well, it's not little, it's a big thing, but the banning of the bottom trawling and the Danish seining, that needs a separate regulation to go through. So we've so that's out for consultation at the moment and over the election period, so people can comment on those different options. And then the bill, which is the marine protected areas, so the high protection areas, that's had its first reading. As you said, it's been sent off to select committee, and I'm pretty sure submissions are open for that over the election period as well. So two things, really keen to hear people's views on those. And the fisheries plan is it's great that we're taking this ecosystems-based approach, and that's because most of the fisheries work is species by species, and it's you do a lot of really great fishery science into stock assessments to work out what the maximum sustainable yield is for those fish stocks, but it's just really looking at fish stock by fish stock, whereas a plan that's looking at the ecosystem as a whole can think about, well, what is the interaction between the kinna, and they have a habit of, at the moment, making these kinna barrens in the North Island, and the seaweed and the predators that would eat the kinna that then eat the seaweed, and then the juvenile fish that would grow up in that seaweed have nowhere to live, and so there are all these flow-on effects. So really, really good that we're doing fisheries planning like this now.
Very interesting. Is there any reason at the moment why someone might combat this, or is there a pretty general consensus so far?
I think most people are okay with the protection areas, and so with the bill, there is involvement of mana whenua in terms of the customary fishing, and also some management of those areas. So there's been a little bit of pushback from some parts of society on that. I think it's a great thing. With the bottom trawling, the options range from 74% to 89%, and I think industry is okay with those numbers, but there are people in the Gulf who would like it to be 100% banned. That would have some impacts on those fishes, and the work that's gone into it is to really look at areas that have already been bottom trawled, and that are in no way high biodiversity areas, so to let it continue in those very restricted areas, and to focus on these marine protected areas too.
Thank you. I've heard talk about it for a very long time.
Oh,
and how about it's progressively getting worse, nothing's being done about it, and sure enough, I look you up and something's being done about it. Thank you.
Look, in so many community people have been involved, particularly with that the work around the sea change, and at the moment so many people in that area too are involved with kalupa, which is an invasive seaweed, and it seems to be on sort of more yachts, and when they anchor, it seems to be related to how the anchoring works, but really have exploded in that part of the world. And mana whenua in particular are really concerned about it, and have brought people over from California to try and work out, they've got the seaweed as well, to try and work out methods that you can extract it and get rid of it.
So on the topic of our environment, New Zealand has experienced one of the highest rates of agricultural land intensification over recent decades. Between 1996 and 2018, almost 60,000 hectares of exotic grasslands was converted from low producing to high producing, compared with only 3,500 hectares of exotic grasslands converting from high to low producing. What does this mean for the environment and also our waters, and how sustainable can we realistically increase production with the tools and knowledge that we currently have?
Okay, that's quite a big question. I think going back to the Hauraki Gulf, some work, and I should acknowledge my colleague Willow Jean Prime is the Minister for Conservation, so the bill with the marine protected areas is hers, but I'm very supportive of it, and we work very closely together. But another colleague, David Parker, is the Minister for the Environment, and he's worked for a long time now on the Essential Freshwater Package. So that is very much trying to do better for our freshwater quality, impacts on the marine environment too, with setting various different limits and doing things like saying, well, if you're farming on a steep slope, then some circumstances you'll need a resource consent because we don't want animals grazing and then having sediment runoff. So there's been a lot of work. Also, another colleague, Damien O'Connor, is the Minister for Agriculture. The MPI, the Ministry for Primary Industries, has a lot of different funds to work with farmers to look at the best methods of farming and to educate people about those as well. Part of the essential freshwater package is that we'll need to have farm plans as well, and you need people who can work to make those farm plans and do some accreditation around that as well. And in terms of climate change, I know this is slightly off the topic of your question, but obviously, half of our climate change gases are from agriculture. And so there's a lot of work going into looking at how we can decrease those emissions, and including, centres of scientific expertise as well. I don't know if I answered all of your question though, so feel free to come back at me.
You did great. I mean, what do you think, Harita? Is there anything else you'd like to ask?
No, I think you've got the main points of it. And like you said, it's such a huge topic that there's no way we can cover it all in one interview anyway.
Yeah, maybe 1 hour for that one question and we can cover everything.
Can I just add in there that we've had some amazing catchment groups as well do fantastic work that has really stopped pollutions getting into the waterways, and a lot of those groups are farmer-led too, or they're mainly farmer-led. There's one that I've been doing some work with as well that has mana whenua involvement, farmers, and also local communities that live in the areas, and they've been doing really fantastic work. So there's lots of good work out there, but also we do need these regulations, which is this essential freshwater package that I've been talking about, so that we don't have our waters continuing to degrade, that they do have a chance to get better, and that does then those regulations, also called red tape by other politicians, has a result on other business people as well and other food producers. So if you just think, well, we should let anything go into the rivers and flow into the sea, then that impacts on the fishes. So we need to be really careful when we're thinking about, we'll just get rid of all regulations and all red tape. Most or all regulations should be there for a really good reason.
I was researching you a little bit and I randomly came across something. I guess I was going down the rabbit hole. But I did read that the US court ordered an immediate ban on importing New Zealand fish caught in Maui dolphin habitat to help protect the endangered species. The ban was brought on by the conservation group Sea Shepherd, which argued that there was a lack of action by the New Zealand government to protect critically endangered Maui dolphins. And the ban was to remain in place until the United States made a finding that New Zealand's regulatory program for the fisheries is comparable in effectiveness to the US one, or until the court case is fully resolved. This was, I think, maybe last year, but I can't actually find anything online about a resolution to this. Do you know where we are at with this situation now?
Yeah, so it's still in play.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there was an interim decision, but there has to be a subsequent one. So obviously New Zealand will say, we do have lots of protections around the Māui and the Hector's dolphins. And one of the really useful things that we've done is introduce cameras onto boats. So that's for the inshore fishing fleet, which is where those dolphins are. And there's a whole lot of no fishing zones as well to do with their habitat, and there's threatened species plans for them as well, and voluntary measures that happen if any are caught as bycatches as well. So obviously nobody ever wants any dolphin to be caught though.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was very interesting. Obviously it's not a great look for New Zealand, but hopefully once the court case goes through, or once they find that New Zealand is looking after the dolphins the way that they would hope, there would be a decent amount of media attention that comes with that too. But what's the bet there won't be?
I think people are interested in it, and we've
Oh,
got some
okay.
good environmental journalists in New Zealand, and they often are asking me questions, and that's great.
That's really good. I've been having so many discussions over how negative the media often is, or how they don't often pick up on really positive resolutions. So it would be fantastic to see one for this.
Dan, we'll move on to a couple of things about your experience in Afghanistan before becoming a politician. Tell us a bit about your experience about being deployed to Afghanistan, and how was the organisational morale within the Defence Force when you were part of it?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because since being an MP, I get asked about Afghanistan a lot, whereas before it didn't really come up.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just because I don't know, I was in that world where everyone else had also served there, and my wife and my kids had already heard all the stories and everything like that. So it's been quite cool being able to revisit a lot of those memories, and really enjoyed that, And yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, I deployed to Afghanistan on two occasions. The first was in 2005, and then the second was in 2012. I was relatively young on my first tour. I was about 24 years old, so it was a bit of a cultural shock for me. And looking back, it was a huge responsibility as a young person, and something I probably didn't really grasp the magnitude of at the time. Afghanistan is a poor country, but in the Bamiyan province where we were stationed, that's probably one of the most impoverished regions in the whole country. And although I was a soldier first and foremost, I was also a qualified mechanic. So my job was to keep all the vehicles running. And I also got the opportunity to deploy on some of the longer range patrols. So when when vehicle breakdowns are expected, I'd go out on those. I'd jump in with my rifle, my toolbox, my backpack, spare parts, and then off I'd go. And the roads were quite dangerous. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to travel more than walking pace. In the winter, the temperature would drop below, negative 25 degrees. So vehicle breakdowns were quite common. And then you also had to worry about, being vulnerable to opportunistic, insurgent attacks in the event a vehicle broke down while on patrol. So there's a lot of pressure to get things fixed quite quickly. In terms of the organisation and morale, it was an exciting time. The Kiwi base in the middle of Bamiyan province, it was quite isolated from other coalition forces. There were about 120 of us posted in Bamiyan itself. But then in Bagram Airfield, just out of Kabul, that was the location of the coalition base. And we had a national support element there of around about 10 NZDF staff. And I remember morale being quite high. At that time in 2005, the NZDF hadn't suffered any casualties. So, although we respected the threat and were well trained to respond, looking back, personally, I don't think I really appreciated the risk. But at the time, I had no kids, and I had a bit of a 10-foot tall and bulletproof mentality. But that was very different on my second tour. By then, we had lost 10 people. The threat had significantly increased, and when my rotation was preparing to deploy, two soldiers, Lance Corporal Prali Dura and Lance Corporal Rory Malone, were killed in a contact with insurgents up in the northeast of the Bamiyan province, the area that we were operating in. And then a few weeks later, Corporal Luke Tamatea, Private Richard Harris, and Lance Corporal Jacinta Baker were killed when their vehicle was hit with an IED. And so my rotation deployed a few weeks later, and I was a different stage in my life. I had my son was 2 years old at the time. My wife was pregnant at the time that I deployed, and it was looking like I wasn't going to make it back for the birth of my daughter. And by then, I was more aware of my own mortality, so to speak. And I was also a little bit more senior, so I was responsible for other soldiers, and I had to make sure that they were in a good headspace and mentally prepared for what was potentially going to be ahead. And those deaths hit home because the army New Zealand, it's a small cohort, And Jacinta Baker, she was the first woman to be killed while serving in the New Zealand Defence Force since a nurse was killed during the Vietnam War, and that was significant. And I think Jacinta's death struck a chord with the New Zealand public. Generally, when New Zealand society think of veterans and soldiers dying overseas, they have this vision in their mind of, old men and wearing their medals outside the RSA on Anzac Day. But in reality, veterans are mixed. There's also young women in the military right now who serve in our armed forces every day, who train for armed conflict. They're just as prepared to go into battle as their male counterparts, if that is what is asked by them of the government of the day. So all those 5 deaths made the public, sit up and question why New Zealand was in Afghanistan. Jacinta's death, I think, in particular, was a real shock to the average Kiwi. And so, that was something that really resonated with me at the time. In terms of, how we were received, I love the people of Afghanistan. We were well received over there. The level of ingenuity and raw resilience of the people over there is amazing. The kids are pretty cool as well. Had the opportunity to go to a few places around the world, and kids are the same everywhere. They're cheeky, and it's pretty cool to see. And I think us Kiwis, we approach things, quite different as well. And I think that's why we do so well overseas, because we can connect with people at a grassroots level, where sometimes some of the larger superpowers don't have that same appreciation. So we can achieve a lot with very, very little. Yeah.
It was a very intriguing story. I couldn't look away for half of it, actually. How much did the deaths that you did encounter influence the removal of the troops that were deployed in Afghanistan? I remember Jacinda Ardern described it as the longest running deployment in the nation's history. I'll be interested to know what you thought about it and how the reception was within New Zealand and the Defence Force itself.
So about after we drew down troops, so to speak. Yeah, it was, to be honest, I had mixed feelings. I don't have the money to speak on behalf of anyone else that served, but my personal view is that, although I returned to New Zealand after my second tour, part of me never really has. I think about my time in Afghanistan most days. I think about the people of Afghanistan. I think about, those Kiwis who died over there serving, and I often think about the situation in Afghanistan right now. And as a politician, I spend a lot of my time thinking about, what New Zealand should do if we are faced with the prospect of deploying our armed forces again in the future. And although it'll be up to the government of the day to decide, members of Parliament need to remember that for veterans, their families, and their community, the battle often goes on well after that last shot is fired. And as a veteran myself, I see it as my responsibility to make my parliamentary colleagues aware that the decision to deploy troops can have intergenerational consequences. So we better be doing it for the right reasons.
It's a scary prospect. I know it's something that people talk about a lot. I think the war in Ukraine and Russia have really brought that to light at the moment, though.
Absolutely.
Over the past year, New Zealand has contributed more than 78 million of financial and military support to Ukraine. And since February last year, New Zealand has taken significant and unprecedented actions to support Ukraine, including the deployment of NZDF troops into Europe and passing the Russia sanctions that has enabled us to improve targeted sanctions for the first time outside of the UN framework. Are you able to give us a bit more detail on these targeted sanctions, and what does operating outside of the UN's framework for the first time mean for New Zealand?
Yeah, sure. So if you were to ask me 10 or 15 years ago whether there would be a large-scale conventional war in Europe, I would have said no way. At the time, the West was in both Iraq and Afghanistan, fighting what they call an irregular war. It wasn't against a nation state, but against individual terrorist networks, which required a rewriting of the book, so to speak, in warfighting doctrine and how sanctions were applied. And to combat terrorism, sanctions at the time were aimed at closing the funding pipelines that support terrorist activity. Now, in the case of the Russia-Ukrainian war, you have a nation state that's run by an oppressive regime that is essentially the terrorist. And they have a leash over their economy and its people. So the sanctions that you see are a lot more broad, where you're not just sanctioning individuals, but you're also imposing trade sanctions. And some of those examples are, like expanding the export ban on Russia and Belarus to cover like industrial products of strategic importance, and adding tariff lines to those. Things like, the importation of Russian oil, gas, and coal, because that really feeds into their economy. Banning the export of oil exploration goods and equipment required to pull oil out of the ground, and then banning luxury goods and things like that. So you're trying to get between Putin and the oligarchs, and tighten up the money flow, because one thing Putin doesn't want to happen is to get offside with the oligarchs that pull the strings behind the scenes. So, when these sanctions are applied with our like-minded partners, we want to achieve first two things. So first is to make it harder for Putin to fuel his military-industrial complex, and second is to tell the Putin regime, that hey, if you want to be part of the global economy, if you want to be a global citizen, then you have to play by some basic rules, and right now you're not. And yes, New Zealand has provided support in the form of training and non-lethal aid and donated to the NATO Trust Fund. But all of this is with the aim of bringing the war to an end. And once the war ends, I think that will be where New Zealand could really use its skill sets to form a provincial reconstruction, demining program that assists the communities to rebuild, just like we did in Afghanistan for all those years.
As someone who knows very little about this, how many other countries that you're aware of are involved? Or are there countries that kind of stand back and they don't want to be part of what's currently a conflict, to put it very nicely?
Yeah, good question. So the majority of the East have imposed some form of sanction against Russia. A lot of them have applied the same sanctions as we have. Some countries are sitting on the fence, essentially. They don't want to pick a side. And then you have other countries like Iran, China, who haven't, they're aligned with Russia, so to speak. So in terms of the economy, probably I'd say around 60 to 70% of the global economy has been cut off to Russia in some shape or form. Yeah, so it's quite significant. The Russian economy before the war started was around about the same as Italy's, and the life expectancy of an average Russian male was around about the same as a male in Sudan. So the country was facing a lot of challenges before this war even began. So these sanctions will be biting pretty hard right now.
It's interesting because I know there's a lot of people who are concerned that entering a conflict is going to put a target on New Zealand's back. But at this point, clearly many other countries are involved.
There's NATO, and Ukraine is not part of NATO. So everything changes as soon as you get any conflict that goes into a NATO country, then all of NATO responds. And that hasn't happened yet, but it's very close. I was lucky last year to be on a cross-party trip, and we were in Latvia and Lithuania, and that's what they're waiting for. And it was interesting in Latvia, they were very quick to say, you people and the rest of the world didn't see this coming, but we've been saying since 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea that this was going to happen, and we've been trying to say this loudly, but certainly Europe very, very concerned about that war. And then you have the bigger geopolitics that Dan was talking about in terms of China still trading with Russia, and what that means.
Very interesting. I have so much to learn.
In the last 15 years, women in the military have said that they find it a safer environment than they did in the past, but they claim that there's still a lot of work to be done, in particular the areas of increasing recruitment, retention, and progression to senior ranks. And harassment has also dropped from 19% to 10.4% over the last 4 years, which is definitely an improvement, but still a lot of work to be done. However, women in all the services also report higher rates of bullying than men, 13.4% versus 6.6%, and there has been no improvement on this over the last 6 years. What's your personal experience been for women in the force, and has it actually improved over the years?
Yeah, so I mean, the Defence Force has come a long way over the last 25 odd years. When I enlisted back in the 90s, there was not many women at all, especially in the army. And just to give you an example, I remember on one occasion as a young soldier, our whole platoon was gripped up to have this meeting with the boss, and he said to us, righto, gents, there's a batch of recruits coming, and one of them is a woman. And it was quite a big thing. And at the time, our workplace, we only had male toilets. And when we went to Tekapo to do our field training, the shower block was just one room with 10 shower heads. There was no dividers or anything like that. So the Defence Force, they've come a long way since those days. My personal experience is that women in the Defence Force don't tend to take any crap from anyone. And I've seen many examples where men, they've been put in their place pretty quick, if they say anything or do anything that's inappropriate. That's not to say that there's not issues. And I think leaders do need to play a visible role in setting the vision and standard for behaviour that's appropriate. That was a very big thing when I was a commander, is to, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, and empowering soldiers, commanders at all levels to actually call out inappropriate behaviour. So it's a lot bigger than what it used to be. It hasn't always been like that. But what I do now that I'm in the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Select Committee, and we have senior commanders before the committee for estimates, hearings, annual reviews and things like that. And I do make a point of asking that question to senior leaders within the NZDF. How are they improving pathways to get women into senior leadership positions? How are you allowing for soldiers to start families and giving them a bit of latitude in the training and the deployments abroad and all the other commitments that come with being a soldier? And so I hope that as an MP, when I raise these issues, they're going to start to pick up what we're putting down and make sure they resource it and focus on it at the higher level of the organisation, so it filters down to commanders across all levels. So it's definitely something, because I know the system quite well, I tend to know what strings to pull to make things happen. So really enjoying that.
Oh, so we might see those numbers come down in the next year or so. We'll see.
It's one of those organisations that takes a long time to change. There's a lot of, militaries have been around for hundreds of years, and sometimes you have to be pretty bold and decisive and act on inappropriate behaviour relatively quick. You can't let it fester or it tends to get out of control. But that's what leadership's about. It's making sure you jump on it pretty quick.
Yeah, I think the point is there has been consistent change over time. And as you said, 6 years, it's not really a lot, especially in the military where, as you said, it's been around for so long. So having more women in the military is a huge change, which is fantastic. It's really exciting.
And some of my best soldiers were women, and particularly in the Pacific. And when you're deployed on operations, they add so much value into when you go into a village and you need to get information. They have access that men don't. They could, and so it just goes to show how important diversity is within the Defence Force, because the soft power approach that New Zealand takes, that's why we're so successful, is because of our diversity within our armed forces. So we've got to promote that at any opportunity that we can get.
Leading on from that, because we are nearing the end of our interview, some people have expressed support to join forces with Australia. And the former Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, says Australia could be brought into New Zealand in as its seventh state without a referendum because it's actually part of the constitution, citing that the military and economic benefits that it could create for the seventh state would be incredible. I'd love to hear what you both think.
As food safety minister, we have joint food regulations with Australia. So it means recently I was able to host the Australian ministers in Wellington, which was great. And I've never really followed Australian politics too closely. I think, New Zealand's enough to keep one's head around. And so I had one from the Commonwealth over and others from various different states. So we able to try and explain the system to me. And I think it's great that we live in New Zealand and that we are unicameral and can get things done with that one level of government plus our local government, which is very important as well. And of course, with New Zealand having its treaty arrangements, I don't see how that could possibly work with Australia and its very different system. So no, love Australia and think that we should keep working with them whenever we can, when it's efficient and productive. But no, very definitely no to becoming a state of Australia.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear a former deputy prime minister talking about how fantastic it could be. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, because we were originally going to be part of Australia, back before the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. We were actually, technically part of New South Wales back a long time ago. But it's only just through a twist of fate that we ended up being our own sovereign nation.
I don't think a twist of fate. I think
Maori
had complete control over New Zealand, so it was never going to work.
It was kind of there was talk about it in those early days, but I think for all the reasons that Rachel outlined and probably the positive spin on it, like what rugby team would we keep? Would it be the All Blacks or would it be the Wallabies? I don't know.
It would be the All Blacks.
So that would be the sticking point for most Kiwis, not wanting to give up the our pride and joy, which is the All Blacks. So.
And then New Zealanders would have to play AFL as well.
Most
confusing sport ever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what other projects do you both have in the pipeline that you're looking forward to if you're re-elected? Rachel, we'll go first with you.
Sure. So one of the big reforms we did in this term of government was of the Resource Management Act and making a new Spatial Planning Act and Natural and Built Environments Act. So that's really trying to change the way that we do planning in New Zealand to move away from an effects-based approach to an outcomes approach, and to have all the debates in the system further up the food chain, so either in national planning documents or plans rather than consents, where people have bespoke fights every single time and it's very inefficient and takes a long time. And also that we do much better for our long-term planning, so have spatial planning that really looks at what infrastructure is going to be needed for and where areas of growth will be and where also areas of growth won't be. And that might be because of climate change or high biodiversity. So we've passed those laws, but they do need to be implemented, and there's a whole lot of work with that implementation, and it needs to be taken very seriously. So that's one thing I'm really keen on. Another is adaptation. As part of that package, we wanted a climate adaptation bill as well, but it's really tricky. So the Environment Select Committee will be doing some sort of investigation or inquiry into how we do adaptation in New Zealand. And one of the big sticking points is how you fund adaptation equitably for existing activities. So where you have towns that might be by a river that's going to flood more often or might be near the sea and we're going to have sea level rise, and if those people have been living there for a long time, they're not big fancy houses, they're just normal houses, what should government be doing? What should local government be doing? What should those individual property owners be doing? Because of course, lots of people in New Zealand don't own property. So So where are the fairness issues? Where do we land on them? Do we need something like the Earthquake Commission fund? And surely all of these things will really need to be bipartisan as well, so that they have longevity. So those are two things that I'm really interested in for the future. I can't. Did you ask for three things, or was it two things?
Oh, that was great
There's
detail.
enough.
You're absolutely fine. I know you want to go back to your kids, and the interview is nearly over anyway, so you were fantastic. I will be watching on Parliament TV to see whatever you may bring up in the future, and I'm very intrigued. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, so I chair the Parliament, or the cross-party group, the Parliamentarians for the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and Disarmament. And I really want to get my teeth into that nuclear disarmament space. And the way the world's going, we need to export our nuclear-free message at every opportunity that we can. I think the one thing that we traversed the Russia-Ukrainian war, so I think it's appropriate to inject it in here, is, interestingly, New Zealand is one of the few Western nations that still has diplomatic relations with Russia. So we have an embassy in Moscow. Moscow has an embassy here in Wellington. And there's a specific reason for that. We are world renowned for our nuclear-free approach to international relations. And if there was a stage, if the Russia-Ukrainian war entered a period of nuclear escalation, where both sides were seeking to establish escalation dominance one over the other, we are quite well positioned to be able to act as a diffuser in that kind of situation. And largely that's what the West sees our role as being when if we do get to that stage. So having regular contact through those diplomatic channels is extremely important. The other one is around the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the Pacific and concerns around the increase in the modernisation of nuclear arsenals worldwide. We have China's been modernising their nuclear arsenal. Through the Cold War, they had about 60 nuclear weapons. Now they have about 450 all up. And the concern that, that signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty have is around, what if they change their posture? They currently have a no first use nuclear posture, but they might want to switch to what they call an asymmetric escalation posture, where they want to use nuclear weapons first, or they'll be prepared to use them first. And what would that mean for the Pacific? Would that then mean that countries like Japan, the Philippines, South Korea may choose to procure nuclear weapons to counter that threat? And these are the concerns that us and small island nations in the Pacific have. So we need to act as a diffuser at any opportunity that we can to first say to these large nation states with nuclear weapons, by saying, we need to reduce arsenals. We need to keep your postures as they are, do not change them, and then gradually reduce the stocks that they do have, because that's the only way that we can prevent nuclear war. And we've talked about climate change and the threat of things damaging the climate. The one thing that we can do right now is to for the climate is to prevent a nuclear war. And so I spend a lot of my time thinking about that, and I'm really keen to immerse myself in that non-proliferation space and export that at any opportunity that we can get. And then on the side of that, really keen to kind of build support for our veteran community, particularly our contemporary veterans that have served in Afghanistan and East Timor and Iraq and things like that. So that's kind of the area I like to look out, and those are the areas I like to cover off. So yeah.
You will probably get an email from me asking you to come back, and we can have more chats about that one day.
No worries.
I'm absolutely fascinated. I'll be researching so much, and then I'll ask you all these questions, and probably none of them will be very accurate, but
yeah, we can talk about this for ages.
Yeah. Anyway, we do only have a few minutes left, so very, very quickly, in the consideration of the serious topics we've been talking about, can you both share the funniest moment that you've had in Parliament so far? We'll start with you, Dan.
Okay, so I did check with the individual about this, just to make sure it was okay for me to say it. But probably the funniest thing that I had in the term or happened was Ibrahim Omar. He's a good mate of mine. We are in the office next to each other. We're both in the class of 2020 or with Rachel as well, and we've become really good mates. But he was fasting during Ramadan, and it was during a stage of urgency within the house. We were doing extended hours, and he hadn't eaten all day. And we were in the house on house duty, and he fell asleep next to me. And the Deputy Prime Minister was talking. She was on the front bench, and you could see Ibrahim catching some Z's asleep. And I get this text message from one of my friends who was watching Parliament TV. Hey, do you know Ibrahim next to he's been sleeping for the last 5 minutes? And so it was a clandestine kind of elbow nudge. Hey man, you gotta wake up, So we have a lot of laughs about that, but that's kind of one of those memories that stuck out from this term. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. We actually interviewed him not too long ago. He's really cool.
He's an awesome bloke.
Yeah, he's cool. What about you, Rachel?
Oh, well, the most recent one would be yesterday when I had the Prime Minister was in Dunedin, and we went to a student flat, and some student flats in Dunedin have names, and the name of the student flat was the Love Shack, as in the song, presumably. And then we had a media stand up afterwards, and all the journalists were like, "Oh, so what did you think of the student flat, and what do you think of the Love Shack?" And then he started going, "Oh yes, well it brought back some like fond memories." All I go, "Oh, I want to think about that." And but I didn't say anything. But my colleague Ingrid Leary, who was on the other side of him, she must have sniggered. It was just like, I heard that snicker. Anyway, it was all just a bit like sort of funny because it was called the Love Shack and he was having some memories, but also a little bit like thinking about your parents or something. It's like, oh,
well, he has been known to say things to stick his foot in it.
Oh, makes it interesting, right?
Oh, that's totally right. That's totally right. And it was a great visit to some awesome students.
Quite a memorable visit too, by the sounds of it.
Oh yeah, and also it was good. Healthy Homes flat. They had their heat pump in there and some good ventilation, so that was good to see.
Oh, fantastic! I've got my heater under my desk right now because it's freezing cold. Well, thank you both so much. We've really, really appreciated you taking the time to chat. This has been Hayley and Harita with Dan and Rachel on Conversations with Wāhine.